Hi guys, this is Franklin from My Law Academy. Listen, equal protection is one of those topics that it's really important to have a systematic approach to. So here's the big picture for analyzing equal protection, whether it's for class or even on an exam. Here are the 4 easy steps. Step 1. When analyzing an equal protection issue, the first step is to apply either the 5th or 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Here's why. The whole reason that you're analyzing equal protection is because some group finds a state or federal law discriminatory. In the first step, you have to identify whether the discriminatory law is coming from the state government versus the federal government. If a state law is discriminatory, then the 5th Amendment is used to determine whether the party's rights to equal protection is being violated. If a federal law is discriminatory, then the 14th Amendment is applied to determine whether the party's rights to equal protection is being violated. Next, there's step 2. The second step is simply to explain what personal characteristic the government is using to make a difference between groups of people. We call this the classification. It's generally something like race, gender, or age. The reason this step is important is because a group that is being discriminated against by a state or federal law because of their race or sometimes their sexual orientation is considered a suspect class. Courts will apply higher constitutional standards to a law relating to a suspect class. But not all laws involve groups that are a suspect class. For instance, a law that puts men on a different sports team than women, or a law that doesn't allow violent offenders to participate in a state program may not be subject to as high a constitutional standard because neither men nor violent offenders are considered a suspect class. One question is, well, are laws that target groups such as sports teams or violent offenders protected under the Constitution at all? Sure. But the thing is, they're not subject to the most stringent constitutional standard because things like racial discrimination are considered relatively more serious and, for that matter, are more protected. Step 3 is the type of discrimination. Now that you know which amendment to apply and how to classify the discriminated group, the third step is to consider what type of discrimination is being used against the class. There are 3 types. There's facially discriminatory, then there's facially neutral, and lastly there's facially neutral with a discriminatory impact and purpose. Here's how they work together. Let's say the state law prohibiting violent offenders from the benefits of a state program is being challenged by a group of former black male prisoners. They allege that the law is racially discriminatory. They'll argue that the state law prohibiting them from the state program is facially or directly discriminatory against them as a racial group. This is hard to establish because most laws are usually not worded in a way that the discrimination is so open or direct. Similarly, this state law was written to prohibit violent offenders generally from benefiting from the state law and not black men specifically. For this reason, the state government will argue that the law is facially neutral. This simply means that the law does not discriminate any more or less against any one group of violent offenders than it does any other group of violent offenders. The challengers will counter-argue that although the law may appear facially neutral, it still has a discriminatory impact and a discriminatory purpose because black men are disproportionately impacted by the law since they are more likely to be convicted of violent crimes. Still, while the impact may be discriminatory, establishing that the purpose of a law was intended to target black male offenders would be tough to prove. Remember, whether in class or on an exam, be sure to make these related arguments and counter arguments. So those are the first 3 steps when analyzing equal protection. But there's one last step, and it's kind of difficult and long. For the final step of an equal protection analysis, watch the next video on the levels of scrutiny.